Hi everyone and welcome to our session Visuallect. And today we have with us Cornelia, and she is a visual thinker, a psychologist and coach as well. And we are so fortunate to have you on our session, Cornelia. Welcome to you. And we are looking forward to have a wonderful session and some tips that we were talking. And I hope that we will have a great session. And I would like to share that this Visuallect initiative is from WAT, that is Women in Agile and Tech, in association with Agile Virgin and Agile Alliance. So we are a group of women which are actively, contributing in the community, and we have various initiatives, various events, and we try to share information with each other, and this is one of our initiatives, and this happens on every third Saturday of the month. And so that is it from our side, and I, along with DP and Purva, is the Visuallect team. And now and I would also like to thank you all the participants who have taken out time and joined us here. And now over to you, Cornelia.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. I already said that in our little pre-talk. It's really an honor to be asked from another part of the globe to share some tips and stories maybe, and to be in the same line of speakers as Brandy Egerbeck. So this is going into my memorials. Yes, I put together some background information and tips and tricks about how to organize our space when we're visualizing, and especially when we're visualizing live. Of course, all these tips and tricks, they also apply in the background information, especially. It applies also if we prepare a visual communication, if we design something, then all of this applies as well. But then it's kind of much easier, of course, because then we can think first and we will know beforehand what's the most important information that we want to get across, and what is the amount of information that we're going to have in our space. And usually we're going to work digitally, so we can size things and change things and try out. And when we work live and on paper, we're much more limited. We have to improvise a lot, and we have to go with what we already put down. We cannot take it back. So I really try to get from this background information. I'm trying to subtract all those tips and tricks and ideas that we can also do in a second step, when we already have our drawing, and then we suddenly see that maybe something doesn't get enough attention from the drawing. It's a really important message, but visually it doesn't have as much weight. What can we still do? Or some things get mixed into each other and they're actually really a separate subject. How can we still separate it? Or how can we get it back together if it seems to be separate? So these are some ideas that I'm trying to share today. Couple of words about me. This is a very nice picture of me. Very groomed. Yes, I'm a psychologist and illustrator. At first I studied psychology because I really am and was always passionate about people and trying to understand, very curious about people and understanding people. But I also always liked to draw and to scribble and to visualize. I was always the one in class that was drawing and that got told off for not paying attention, apparently, but because I was drawing. So I always had these two passions, and sometimes they were a bit competitive. Like when I studied psychology, I thought I had let go of the other passion. But then I actually applied to art school and I studied at art school, and then I felt I had let go of the other passion, the psychologist one. And then actually I ended up working in a completely another job, just administrative work. where I had let go of both my passions. And then when I had my son, who is 5 today, I decided, I was on maternity leave, and I decided not to go back to that work where I didn't have any passion and follow on my passions. And I started to look around and feel like, listen to me, what did I really want? And first of all, that passion for people was the first one that came up, and I decided to train to be a coach. And then quickly something came rolling, and I started to be in contact with people who worked in like creativity and innovation. And even only later, I remembered the first person I collaborated with was also a Scrum Master. And I got to know this world of creative methods and new methods of working. And that's when I got hit with this big word, visual thinking and graphic facilitation. And that was like a moment when I thought, okay, this is something for me. And I started to pursue it, and I studied, and I bought books. So one of the first books I bought was from Brandy Eggerbeck. So that's what the big moment also here was. And yes, and it really combines now these two passions of visualizing and drawing and communicating visually and working with people and trying to understand people. So I'm really happy to have found this way. And when I started to offer courses and also a meetup. And that's when I noticed that lots of people who came to my courses were Scrum Masters or Agile coaches. And that's when I actually got to know this world and also started to read and learn a lot about it. And last year, or I don't remember already, I did also this course for Scrum Master. I don't feel like I really am a Scrum Master because I've never worked as a Scrum Master, but I wanted to know what is this all about. And now I'm reading about Lean, and there's a book, Reinventing Organizations, which is very, which I'm very enthusiastic about as well. So this is about me. And now I teach a lot visual thinking and creativity and collaboration. And I'm going to lots of, lately I'm at home, but I'm teaching people in companies to work more visually and more collaboratively together. So this is my moment in my way. I think I'm relieved because I want to, that I'm going to become much more of a coach, like work more in coaching and consulting. Right now it's more as a trainer, and I wanted to become more coaching and consulting, but this is the way, the path. So this is about me. Now let's get going. I have some ideas that could be summed up in something like this. This is an example that we sometimes see, sometimes shared in marketing blogs or even in social media, where you can see, I hope you can see that, right? It says you will read this first, you will read this, and then this, and in the last you will read the one on the bottom, on the top. And at least for me, that's completely true. When I look at this, this is the order that I'm going to read and look at this information. And this is what we would call a visual hierarchy. So the different parts, the different different parts of this composition, they draw our attention in a different way. And this is how we can guide the eye of our audience to look at them first here. And also the thing that we read and look at first is also going to be the most important thing. It's not only the first thing, but not always the first is the most important, but in this case actually is. And yes, I want to talk with you about what are the reasons that we will look at one thing first or more. And then we'll talk about how we can handle this also in this second step. Because one thing is, of course, knowing all it and then planning, and the other thing is knowing it and handling it on the go. So one concept that I want to share with you is about visual balance. That's why I draw here this very simple scale, and visual weight. So we can see that there are two squares. So we think them of these are of our objects, the objects that everything that we put in our composition each part of it will have a visual weight. So it's of course metaphorically, and what we would think of as weight is the capacity of an element to attract the eye. So the heavier it is, the more we will look at it. And then the visual balance would be that state of our composition where the whole thing seems to be at rest. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what are the things, what are the characteristics of a component that will make it weigh more or less. And then in the end, we can talk more about the visual balance. And I also have another topic prepared. So I'm sharing this series of comparisons, and you can all check with yourself. And it's actually interesting because there's one which I'm not sure, but here you can see which of these two elements would you rather like, which has more visual weight. And I guess this one is pretty clear, like the size matters. a bigger element will call more attention. So this is one thing we can have in mind, just very generally. Then this one is maybe a little more hidden, and I'm sometimes thinking this could also be much more culturally influenced, but they do say that towards the bottom of our composition, the things will have more weight. So the position where we put it in our screen, if it's more to the bottom, it has more weight, and also more to the right. So maybe if in a culture where we write from the right to the left, maybe that will be the other way around. And also in a moment we'll think about how we can all these laws of perception, how we can test them, and maybe also ask behind them. But yeah, this is one of the suggestions. Then we have another one, and this one is also a tricky one, because here actually my eyes usually go to the mess, not to where there are many squares. But we're thinking about in terms of single weight of each one of these squares. And then it's actually the case that an isolated object will draw more attention. Now here, because they all look the same, but if we think that these were visual notes that we have been taking, then if we have one note, maybe we wrote down a little quote and we wrote it here on the left, and then we load lots of different quotes on the right side, then the one that is on the left that is isolated will somehow seem more important because it has all this space around it, and it will draw more attention, and it will seem like this is the quote that has more important weight, both visually but also conceptually. If it's too fast, then you give me a nudge. This one is also interesting because especially when we're drawing, of course, we wouldn't draw this kind of structure. But it is true that these elements that are not completely even, and when we draw, especially when we color in, we usually don't color in completely even, or maybe we fill it with some kind of little drawing. I think, for example, of fish, and you would fill it in with all the little fish, a fish skin, I don't know what you call it, or hair. If you draw a person, and you draw their curly hair, then this will give a lot of structure. And this structure will also give this element more weight. So we will draw more attention to it visually. It will have more weight.
Cornelia, I just have a small doubt. I mean, is it okay to interject?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm curious to know, why are you calling this as structure? Because what it reminded me more of a texture rather than structure. Structure is when you are arranging the elements, up and down. Here we have a single element, and what it occurred to me that you're going to talk about texture. That texture adds to the visual weight. So, what is your thought, and what is the principle behind calling this structure?
That's a very good question. Now that you said texture, it really sounds very, maybe a better, better word for this concept. Maybe you're completely right. Maybe, yeah, maybe I'm giving in too quickly, but I mean, English is also not my my native language. So maybe texture, as it's the thing that you can even feel, almost feel with your fingers, right? Maybe we should call it texture.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're drawing it visually, so you can probably draw it with a pattern or something fill it. The kind of like the people do, if you look at Instagram and other people have this micro tiles where they're using micro pens to draw some those patterns something. So maybe texture or pattern is what I would relate this to.
Yes.
But thank you.
No, thank you. I think I'm going to change that.
In fact, many of the applications on mobiles, when you make your presentations, they do have a lot of, different kinds of things which you can put just swiping with your finger or with your pen. We have all those graphic pens also these days.
Like, you mean like a brush that draws, like already has a texture in the brush when you color something in or so?
Yeah, you can just click on edit on those applications and, it can recognize that with artificial intelligence that, okay, this fish only you want to color. And when you click there, it puts that kind of a structure there.
Yes.
So very beautiful mobile apps have different things have come. And actually what you're telling now, like for example, if you see my face, so my weight with this beard is not so much, but hopefully my content is.
No, but that would mean that the beard would give a lot of texture, so it would call the attention. But I do have to say, and this is not here in my presentation now that I say it, but maybe we'll come to it in the. Now I think there is one part where we should mention it, because a human face, if it has a texture or not, it will always call more attention than like a square, because it has a lot of meaning, and this kind of meaning will overweigh all the other characteristics, and we'll come to that in a bit. This more not as tangible laws of perception, because these are very, of course, very broken down, but we'll come to that as well. Okay, let's have a look at another one. This one is actually the one that I'm doubting, because the literature, let's say, they tell me that a square, an even, a symmetric form will call more attention. But after even preparing this presentation, which I did a while ago, I noticed that I'm always looking at the blob form. So somehow for me here, the blobby form calls more attention. But a general norm is that symmetrical forms and even forms, they should carry more weight. So let's put that, like in the book, it would say this. We'll come also in a moment to how we can always test this. Now about color. We have here all these pairs. They're trying to compare like the upper one with the lower one. And it always suggests that the upper one would call more attention. So there are different rules for this. A darker color would have more weight than a lighter color. But then again, a warm color will have more weight than a cool color. And I have the next slide is a color wheel where we can talk about warm color and cool colors and saturated colors and not. And then the saturated color in the right would have more weight than the grayed out, the shaded color. So let's have a look, because now that I'm putting all these color words out there, let's have a look at the color wheel. Because this is interesting, and also this is a very practical thing that we can use. I don't know how often you have looked at these kind of wheels before, which puts them in the middle. You can see that some of the colors are called primary, which is the yellow, the red, and the blue. And then we have secondary and tertiary, third grade colors, which are mixes of the other colors. And then we have in the diagonal way, we have one line which separates the lower part of the wheel, which are the warm colors, from the upper part of the wheel, which are the cool colors. And this, of course, now we can cool and warm. We can think, okay, if we want to draw a lot of attention, we can take warm colors. And I think everybody knows that, and this is also not, I think that's not culture, that's really everywhere like this, that red is the color that draws a lot of attention. That's why it is used a lot in traffic. That's actually a physiological thing of our perception, that the cells that perceive red color are the ones that are most broad, that are one that are very broad in our eyes. So if something comes red, comes from the side, comes jumping into my sight, I'm going to see it first if it's red. So if we want to make something if we have a black and white, if we drew everything until now with black and white, and then we want to draw really attention to one part of the drawing, we can paint it red, and then it's going to draw a lot of attention. Of course, again, we have the fact that dark colors will have more weight than light colors. And then, of course, we have these are like counting laws. If you put a dark blue and a bright red, then they maybe start to fight a lot for attention. And that's where we have to look at for our visual balance, because if we have lots of things in our composition that fight for attention in different ways, like they have a lot of texture in it, and they use different strong colors, and they're maybe very big as well. Some are small and very red and dark, and some are big but not so. This information, if it's very chaotic, then our perception will also will perceive chaos, and we'll say, this is a lot to take in. Give me a minute. So this is a lot of lots of different rules, and maybe we can start to be a little bit nervous about it. But don't be. If you're nervous right now, breathe. We're gonna have in a moment a very simple trick that can help us to keep calm. I wanted to say here about colors. I usually say in my courses, try to use only 2 or 3 colors to start with. But again, then I had a student who came to lots of courses, and he used many colors, and it was just beautiful. It was great. So why should I tell him to use less colors? But we can, if we are unsure, and for example, if we feel that it's overloaded with information, and maybe overloaded with maybe it feels a bit childish sometimes, like infantile, then we could take out a bit color and try to use only 2 or 3 colors. And we can also think that if we only use 2 or 3 colors, it can get this kind of a visual identity, like more like a style, like a website of a company. They will use the company colors, and in that way we can also apply color in our recordings or in our sketchnoting, thinking this is kind of my note, my design, and I'm using this color palette. And I'm using, for every design that I make, I'm using 2 or 3 different colors, and I try to combine them in a way. And the other thing that I'm noticing, is when we, of course, especially if we work, if we work digitally as well, then we have maybe more ways of filling in something with a color. If we work with markers, then we usually will, as you can see here, you can see the line of the marker. And of course, at once this will add some texture, which is not bad at all. Actually, I think it's nice, but we have to think about this. Then we have this, what the brands, they sell the chalks. If we want to color something if we want to color back a big, for example, a speech bubble. If we want to color in the whole speech bubble, of course, we should use light color. and maybe a cool color, so that because we don't want the color itself to call attention. So maybe we would want to use a light color and a cool color, and we could even use a little bit of a shaded color. And we don't want to use a marker. We want, because then we have a lot of this texture in the background, and it wants to be background. It doesn't want to come into the foreground. And then I have another drawing here from my now home city, because then after here, I'm still kind of filling in all the bodies. And then after drawing more and more, I started often to, for example, in the upper left, where I drew the Sagrada Familia, I often only just like mark the color and I don't fill it all in. And we can see lots of visual and graphic facilitators, they do like this. And I think it has also to do with this visual weight, that we don't want to, if I draw it all in, and especially in red, then it will have so much weight. And if I want to avoid this, but still say this is a red, I mean, it's not even red, but red building, or if this is a green suitcase, I can just like give it this green touch and say, okay, this is green, but I don't have to color it all in. Okay, this is the practical thing. We can do the squint test, where you close your eyes almost fully, and then you can't read anymore what you've written, and you can't really distinguish what you did, but you can perceive better this visual balance, because especially in our own work, we're so in it, and we know how so much what everything means, that it is hard to perceive sometimes this visual weight, because all the rules that I told you, these are in our brains, that these are not rules we usually have to learn. This is the rules that our brain apply, but especially in our own work, it's really hard sometimes to tell. And then we can squint, or we can go to the back of the room and look at it from a bigger distance, and then we can see that suddenly, I don't know, we draw a small person, not important at all, but it's the only thing that is red, because that person was wearing a red sweater, and suddenly it's jumping very much to my attention. And these are the things that we can see if we do the squint test. And we'll see something like that. And this is when we'll see, okay, what is important in this composition is that there is a tree, and there's this path, which is a little diagonal curved line at the bottom. And then we have a diagonal line in the back. And these are the things that are important in this composition. And this is how we can check our own composition.
And time check, sorry to interrupt. We have crossed half of our time. So
yes. Yes. Okay, then I'll try to go quickly through the next part, which is also background information, so we can come to those. I mean, I'm trying to mention practical tips, but now I have some more background information, and I want to come to those practical tips. So this was the talk about the visual weight, which we can have in mind if we want to balance out our composition. And then we'll come to something like this. The one thing that I wanted to say here to this slide is that we can kind of create our own visual hierarchy, and trying to define it. For example, in this design, there are four levels. Like read this first, then this, then this, then this. So we have like 4 levels of importance. And we can somehow try to design even on the go around this, and say, okay, everything that is super important will have this size. And then something that is less important will maybe half the size. And then we maybe just one, or if it's a very big drawing, 2 more steps, like in 3 or 4 levels of hierarchy. And then try to always adapt the size of whatever we are writing or drawing to that level, and not making everything in different sizes, but for example, the size of our letters, trying to keep straight to 3 different levels, a big one, a small one, and a very small one, for example. Okay, so the other background information is about figure and ground. This is like how our visual perception works like. It's called from the Gestalt psychology. It's not so much the Gestalt therapy, which is a bit something different, but it goes back to the same roots. But this is more really about visual perception. And this is like in the 1920s, 30s, some psychologists who are German, as I am, they figured out and tried and studied how our eye, our visual perception, makes sense of what we see. And this is actually also quite useful when we try to design and draw. So they came up with these different laws, they call them laws of perception, which decide what kind of information will be perceived as one object, one figure, and what will be more perceived as belonging to a ground and not as important. And how come things together, and how come that things are perceived as separate. And I'm just sharing some these laws, which are super simple. And then sometimes after hearing them, it's like, of course, but it's still interesting. And of course, we can apply this completely. So the first one is the law of proximity. So things that are very close together, we will perceive them as belonging together. And of course, in our drawings, this is maybe the first and the most intuitive one. If we, for example, want to record a speech or a discussion and different people are talking, we will maybe draw the person and what they say. We will draw what they say next to that person, close to it in the proximity. And what somebody else says and what their picture and what they say, we will also draw close to each other in proximity. And then we will perceive that this goes together. Of course, this is one of the things that we cannot change after we already did it. So this is one of the laws that we want to have in mind, but it's not something that we can, in a second step, especially if we did digital graphic recording, we can still change it. But if not, we have to find other laws that are more flexible for us. So we have a law of similarity, and this is where we can use color. So if everything seems a bit of everything is like we drew this visual labyrinth, maybe without wanting to, everything is full, we don't have any space anymore, then we can use color. And for example, if two quotes come together, we can underline them with the same color or little color spots and make this come together and this and this. Or even across a whole drawing, we can, for example, everything that one person said, even though it's all across our screen, we can always color this person in red and the other person in green, or give it a little touch of color to make it similar. And then our brain will perceive that this comes together. The law of connectedness. If some things is connected, then the eye perceives them as one object. Like now we don't see 6 circles anymore, but maybe 3 kind of glasses or 3 bicycles or something, of course. And this is something very simple. Then we can just try to connect our lines, try to make the circles connect. This is also why if we draw quickly, we can try. It's always good to try to connect our lines. For example, if we draw a square, instead of making 4 unconnected lines, even though they have the form of a square, we're going to help our eye to perceive it as just one simple form. If we really just draw one line in a square, we connect things, and this is the information for our brain that this goes together. And then we have the law of the common region, which we can do by a frame, or we could do it by coloring in a background, or both. And this is also something we can, to an extent, do when we already finished our graphic recording. We have all full, and then we can still frame something in. And I'm going to show these different kinds of frames that we can use. And this is already the last one. I think the law of continuity. So if we have continuous lines in this visualization, there are 2 competing laws. The one of similarity, because some are all yellow. So we can either perceive a yellow line and a red line, or we can perceive one horizontal line and one diagonal line. So this continuity, at first I didn't even want to mention it because I thought this is not so relevant. But then I thought, yes, it is, because this is what we do when we do lists, like bullet point lists, and we align the text at one, and it all starts at the same height or at the same vertical line. That's why we perceive it as coming together, and that's why it seems so clean. Whereas when one line starts here and here and here and there, they're not connected. They don't seem to belong to each other. But if they all start at the same continuous line, it's just one block of information. So this is also something we can apply. And this is the one that I mentioned before when I said faces, for example, will always have more weight. These German words, Prägnanz and Gestalt, which have not been really translated because nobody really knows how to translate them. They mean something like meaning, it's even something like beauty in it, like a form that is in itself fulfilled, and something like symmetrical, for example, or coming to a meaning. Well, then if we somehow put something together and it makes a form, like it would, a face is one of the forms that have so much meaning that it will always jump out to us. This will always make something come together. This is maybe a bit more abstract, but I think still worth mentioning. And this is why we can either see here a vase or we can see the two faces, and it depends of which of the forms has more meaning to us. Okay, so now the practical tips we have, for example, especially if we want to connect things, and like this kind of using this law of the common region. That's why the graphic facilitators use all these containers. You probably, if you've done something already, you've seen them. And we can use just a square, or we can do them a little bit metaphorically. And we use the speech bubbles, or the banners, or a map, or whatever you can see here. And you could also color them in. I would then really think this has to be a background color, so that it has to be a color that doesn't draw too much attention. And if it can be with as little texture as possible, then it's better, because we don't want the color itself to draw attention. We just want to come to whatever is written inside the frame. We want it to come together. If you use this, I often suggest that you do it, especially if you do it afterwards. You first just record, and then in a second step, you decide what goes together in one frame and what doesn't. Or if you already know that you're going to do a frame, I think it's a good idea to leave it open to one side, because it happens so quickly that whatever we wanted to write, it won't fit into the frame. Or if the frame is already closed, be very careful and be careful not to step over your frame sides. And the other things that we use a lot are these arrows, of course, also for their meaning, because they convey so much meaning, like any kind of process, any relationship, we were going to use arrows, but also visually we can connect different information together. And we can literally draw the line from where the eye should be guided. If I'm going too quick, then you let me know, but of course I can also share this presentation. And then I don't want to talk about lettering today and letters and everything, but I wanted to share this because here I used a lot what I call the separators. So while we can connect and make things come together with our containers and with color and with arrows, we can also try to tell the eye what doesn't go together, and we can just draw a line between two things to make sure this is what one person said and this is what the other person said, or these are the pros and these are the cons. And if it's visually not clear, then we can just literally draw a line between them. And these are different, all the horizontal lines, it's playful separators, but what they're actually important therefore is to separate different content from each other. And then the typical graphic facilitation shadows. I don't know if you've noticed as well that everybody uses shadows, and I also really like them. And for a long time, I thought this was just like a little fun little gimmick, and we just do it. But then when I started to teach about space and figure and ground, I realized that they have this power to make a figure stand more out from its background. So here you have these three different in the three lines, you have three different kinds of shadows. And in the first line, if you see it, these shadows, they pretend that the circle and the banner and the arrow, that they are kind of in front of the rest of the paper, right? It's like if I glued them on, it's like if it were a sticker, and that's why there's a shadow in the background. And it's kind of a game, but it's also really making it stand out more towards the back. So it creates the perception of depth, and this will help our perception to organize all this information that is on our visualization. And if we help our perception to organize it, we're gonna have that brain doesn't have to do so much work, so it has more time to listen to the content. So this is a little here. The first line, the shadow is drawn around the shapes. So this is what it makes. The shape itself is still flat, but it's like a bit in front of the background. And in the second line, the shadow is inside of the shape. So it's more like the shape was three-dimensional, but still look, it's still just one line. So it's still very simple drawing. And then in the third line, we have this game as if our space was three-dimensional itself. And all the objects that I draw, they have a shadow on a floor. So this is where we already create like a three-dimensional world. So this is the thing about shadows, which is kind of, it's fun, but it actually it also really helps us to organize our space. And this is the last with where I try to put information about space together. So lots of things that are here are already said. Use frames, use a hierarchy like a big title, and then the rest of the letters not as big, but also not jumping between too many different sizes. This is like if you were writing a blog post or a Word document, you also don't want to use 10 different fonts and 7 different sizes. You're gonna use 2 or 3 different sizes and fonts. So this is the same for our graphic recording. And you can use color, as you can see here, also to organize your space. The color, it could have like a symbolical meaning, or it could have a meaning that you want to like mark something, or organize, like draw attention to something, or as just, if it's just like decorative, you could use it like I did here. The first line is green, and then orange, yellow, blue, following just the space logic. And then what is here is maybe also a very general suggestion that you always have in mind your white space. So we draw something, so we fill in space, and we care a lot about our drawing, but then we can also care about the space where we didn't draw. And the most general suggestion is that you leave white space, that you leave space around. Like if you feel like you drew something here, then force yourself not to draw the next thing right next to it, but leave just a little bit more space that you were planning to, because you can always, in the end, you can always fill up more space with lines, with colors, with banners, with decoration, with more notes, but you cannot take it away if you already did it. And also, I don't think I have a visual for that, but also in general, if you don't know if you're gonna fill your canvas, or if you're gonna be without space in the end, it's always better to have space left. So just plan with more space, and then if you have space left, you can still write a title or draw something that is metaphorically connected to the talk. You can always rather fill it in. And the one thing is also here that in a bit more, not as black, but gray lines, here, this one I drew a grid. I don't suggest that you really draw a grid, but that you kind of mentally follow a grid. And for example, this grid is very simple. There are 4 columns, okay, and then quite many lines. And it's not that I'm filling in every square of this grid, but somehow I'm aligning the different information that comes up in this grid. And sometimes it can take up 4 parts, like in the frame where it says different kind of frames are fun. It takes up 4, but it's still kind of in this framework. And this is why it creates a lot of visual balance in the end. Okay, I feel I'm run like the wind and almost the time is up. I only have
Cornelia, just one small question, on this. I'm really intrigued by the arrow that you have there in the middle. The arrow that's got a loop in it, the one with
Yes.
an orange or a red shadow. What's the thought process behind this? Because to me, this is adding a little bit of confusion, to this. A little bit of clutter, a little bit of twistedness. So where did you use that and what was the thought process behind it? I've never used an arrow like this. It has always been straight arrows. So this is something very unique and very intriguing. I'd like to know your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Yes. Well, that's a good question. The general answer it would be that, of course, in the way that you draw the line, the arrow, you would convey this relationship that is between the 2 things that you're connecting. So yes, this arrow, as you said, it creates a bit of a confusion and it suggests that this relationship is not so straightforward. So maybe I would say this, if somebody explained to me that it was a really complicated journey, but in the end we got there, something like that, metaphorically could be conveyed with this kind of an arrow.
Actually, use that particular thing for, showing a processing happening or an iteration, for example. We use these kind of arrows, to show, okay, we did something here. It's got a loop in itself.
Yes, you mean like a sprint, right? Like something, an iterative process.
Actually, that's the beauty of visual thinking. You are thinking non-linearly, because you can depict this arrow in many ways. So that's the beauty of visual thinking, I feel. Yeah, I agree with you, Rupesh, that we use this for showing agility, where we say that we adapt, or we are doing things in iterations. Yeah, and it could be when things are not so straightforward, there could be some hurdles, or things are not that straight. So yeah, that could also be one of the depictions from this arrow. But any other thought that comes to the mind when we see this arrow?
Any other associations with this kind of arrow?
This arrow can be so many thought processes. It can also be a part of my recursive loops. It can be a part of my R&D loops. It can be a part of wherein you need you have a tech debt, wherein you have to go into that process to find out and get the things done. It can also be part of certain enablers. Different places you can use these kind of arrows, and not only the arrows. Actually, I wanted to point out something else also when we were seeing that color grading, no? So wherever you want people to, really, ignite you have this younger workforce or team levels, we go for these sharper colors or the brighter colors. And when you're talking about, the gray-haired people and, who are the thinkers, they have already got so many complex things on their brains, Those areas or slides, usually I prefer keeping in the cooler colors.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the other thing that comes to my mind when I'm looking at this arrow is that, transition is possible. You can go from state A to state B, but it's not going to be an easy transition. And if you can, supplement it, you can probably hang a little weight from this, that, there are going to be some pitfalls, there are going to be things that are going to pull you down, but, you have to work towards the transition. So now that I'm thinking about it, this is another thought, another suggestion that's coming in my mind.
Yes. Yes, I'm really glad. I mean, actually, I had this whole slide with different arrows, and I jumped away, like, as well quick across it. But just yeah, in general, thinking that we can convey information without words in those connectors that we use. They can be complicated. They could be step by step. They could be manifold. They could be happy or sad or conflictive. All of these things that can be somehow conveyed in such a simple thing as an arrow. Anyone else wants to ask or talk about arrows or anything else that we mentioned or I mentioned? Hope I didn't throw too much information out there and has to be digested. So I only have 5 minutes left, but the idea was I have some of my own examples, but of course it could also be interesting. The idea was that we look at some examples and say, okay, what happened here? Why is this balanced or not? How do things together with of these laws and all these tricks were used here? But we could look at examples yours or just answer questions or comments.
Can you show something on stick figures which indicate some emotions? Like, you know, one of them which I saw in your earlier slide was a person jumping from one place up. You know, it was like happiness which was being indicated. Yippee, you know. Yeah, there's the second one. From top, second in the row, like left side. So, you know, those kind of interesting. And anything else you have got? This is like, I saw it for the first time. Like how I could say, yes, I won.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have so much else prepared. I'm so 4 minutes left. Maybe in general also here, stick figures, and these are pretty much copied from the Picablo way of drawing, which Charu made that course, but you could also get online, you can get a lot of inspiration. And then also to have it like on a more general level, you can think that drawing your people, you can have like and prepare your visual vocabulary of people and conveying emotions or states of mind. So this, I'm also always saying this person jumping of joy, like clapping their feet together. This is in itself, it's almost a symbol because people usually don't really jump like that. It's more like a comic jump, like no, somebody in a film, in an old comedy would maybe jump like that, maybe Charlie Chaplin, but not really jump like that. But we still have this image in mind of this kind of movement for happiness. And as well at the lower bottom, the right person who's bumping his head into the wall, it's also more symbolic because we don't really, hopefully bump our head in the wall when we're really angry, but it's still like a symbolic movement. And these kind of symbolic movements or metaphorical things that we have in our body language, we can exaggerate them and use them in our drawings. Or stamping the foot. I mean, it's also not so common, really stamp your foot, but if you want to draw somebody who's angry, this exaggeration is a kind of easy way to depict this, feeling. Or trembling knees, for example. I didn't draw that tremble here in the person that is below, but this could be something.
Hi Cornelia, one more thing I want to ask. Like it was all good, very good tips and all. We'll surely follow. Is there any other like study material or anything which we can refer also to have something more to get about it? About space, you mean? Yeah, about all these graphics related. You can say making it more, you can say sharper and all. Some tips and tricks, like kind
okay,
of
like a literature, right? Let's me think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that
you know, very well mentioned this point. The thing is, this primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. If we can just go back to that particular round. So actually, I want to really ask on this particular thing. How do you, use which kind of colors usually? Yani, when you are yourself making, which kind of colors will you pick up when?
Yes, I have to tell that a lot of my decisions are very too intuitive. So that's not a good suggestion, because that's like, okay, train your intuition, find your own style. Maybe one good tip that is more tangible is that you can, if you want to combine colors, you can use the complementary colors, which we always say, and I think it's also a scientific fact, that in this wheel, the colors that are opposite each other, they always combine well, because they're called the complementary colors. So green and red would be a good pair. Yellow and blue, lime green and crimson, which is a bit more weird, no? But it's still, these are the good combinations, and you can see that in lots of company colors, no? Like they often use these complementary colors, so they would combine well. And then I like they're not so strong colors. I like the a little bit toned down, like not full colors, and more tertiary or secondary, not primary ones. And I would also only use like one of those colors that are really warm, and then combine them with one or two others that are rather cool. Then it depends if I draw for a client. I sometimes we look for the colors that fit with the client. Also, really, without wanting to make a publicity, but I don't know if you also fan of the Neuland colors, which here in Germany and in Europe, not even in Germany, in Europe, in America, they sell so much. They sell you the already color sets, which kind of makes it has the work done for you, because they really combine well in themselves. As to the meaning, and I've talked about this and did also like tests in different courses. It's apart from the red that calls so much attention, it's quite personal, and it's quite cultural what the colors mean. So if you look for symbolic meaning and good combinations, for example, I don't know, in the 70s where you could combine brown and red all the time, and it was like super fashionable, and now it's back again, but there was a time where you would never combine these. So this is very, that's very fashionable as well. So you have to look also, as you said before, the audience and the area where you work. And just if it feels right for you, like also do the squint test, and if it feels good for you, then that's good. And also, I said before, like I'm usually trying. I'm not daring to use more than 2 or 3 colors, but I've seen people using many colors, and it turns out beautiful. So this is a very unspecific answer. I'm sorry, but I think. This is the truth about these colors, that it's not very hard. It's not very easy to pin it down. It's very personal. You can combine crimson and red and come up with a beautiful design. I hope this kind of helps. Even it's so.
But last question from my side would be, there is some aspect called the gray tones. A lot of people use only the gray tones to highlight the affinity of something with a particular scenario, right? From very light grays to very dark grays. So do you recommend, instead of using those gray tones, to use these kind of colors and shadings?
Interesting. Yeah. You mean in sketch note or graphic recording, they only use gray, different kinds of gray? Oh, I didn't. That's new to me. I think that must be also a kind of a fashion, like a norm that's in some industry maybe, or some surrounding has come to be popular like that.
Usually I have observed that in sketch noting, usually, a black color or different shades of grays are used just to emphasize on, different aspects. Like shadowing could be one of the things. And so yeah, I have mostly observed this kind of usage in sketchnoting.
Okay.
And in
I
fact,
mean,
it
maybe,
looks very professional. I mean, just a tinge of a single bright shade can be there, which is because of the brand of the company. But all the remaining is only in shadows of gray, which is also sometimes branded.
yes. Okay. That must be like a new form of what I said before, brown and red. It must be like the new gray is the new black. Like it must be like an elegant. It could sound very elegant. I mean, gray is, I think, like an elegant color, something that we depict as elegant. And maybe it's like a counter movement towards before there was a usage of lots of colors. So this is like the movement against this, like the counter fashion that we always have. Counter fashions like long skirts, short skirts, and then many color, and suddenly we only use gray. Now, I don't know if that, maybe it's also important to say with color, I do always suggest that the line is black or maybe a dark gray, but not the line itself. I really think that's not very depending on fashion. I think that's just because, again, with the perception of our eye, if the line itself is using different colors, it's too much information and it starts to be too confusing. I think the line should be at least very dark. And if it's black, then we can combine any colors with it. So, and the shades, where did I do this? Where did I have the shades? Well, whatever. The shades, I think they're nice in gray, or I always like to use like a bright blue, but they could actually be also in a color. But then again, you have to control more the combinations and the visual weight, because the shadow itself shouldn't have any weight. It's exactly what wants to draw more weight to the object, not to the color, the shade itself. So a good go is a gray or a bright blue, like a light blue, not a bright blue, a light blue.
And I also have one question for you, Cornelia. Do you prefer doing all this, digitally, or do you prefer doing it on paper?
I prefer on paper, mostly because I'm not as good digitally. I'm not as like my hand doesn't obey my mind as well when I work digitally. Of course, I love the possibilities, working with different layers, being able to move things around, changing the colors afterwards. But I don't get the lines as well. I have so many, my hand has so many hours of drawing on paper in it. I just don't have as many hours of drawing digitally. And then digitally, it always, of course, now I have a Wacom board, a small one, and this is one way of drawing. And then if you draw on a screen, it's different. It's always, the muscles, they always learn it that way. Like you could have your way of drawing a person and you can learn it Bicablo style and you're really good at it, but it's not the same movement if you draw it on a flip chart, on a whiteboard, or on a Wacom board. It's not the same movement, and your muscles will know that. And it's like doing a dance for the first time, even though you're drawing the same person, the same shapes, but in a different format. And you feel a little bit stepping on toes there.
And any tips on increasing visual vocabulary? Because especially in graphic recording, at times that image or icon doesn't click you. So any tips for increasing visual vocabulary?
Well, first of all, drawing a lot and all the time. I had a long phase, and unfortunately not so much lately. I was into urban sketching, and that gives you a lot of, it loosens you very much. And then like you just have a sketchbook with you all the time. And if you sit on the subway or on a park bench, you check it out and you draw everything that you see. You draw a house and a taxi and a person and a skateboard and a vending cart, and you just draw everything that you see. You just draw it all the time. And it's just really good practice, and also really gets you quick, and it also gets you shaking off that uncomfortable feeling that what will people think if I draw. So that would be one suggestion: get into urban sketching and sketch all the time. And even if it's not that, but all the time, like copying a lot, even if it's either copying the world around you or copying, if you see a nice icon somewhere, okay, just, and not only think, oh, there's a nice icon. No, take out your sketchbook and copy it and say, oh, and in this company, the exit sign has this unusual form. I will copy it. Or copying and practicing actively all the time. I think this is one of the biggest ways of practicing your drawings. I think that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Yeah.
In fact, there is one small thing like, a pad and a pen. Even with your Android phone, you can connect it with the Bluetooth, and you can take Zoom sessions like this, and I can just place it here. And if like I write on a board or I draw the same, because the main problem is that we are habituated to these motions, of our hands. So because we have to go with the finger, which is not fine, but you use that apparatus, and you can take your trainings, like, you can put on a full whiteboard, you can have those kind of things, you can draw anything with that. Why? Because you're doing the same thing and it comes perfectly.
Yeah,
right?
That seems like a practical thing to have all the time and on your mind, and you could use that also for your urban sketching, like when you're on the subway or on your taxi, when you just use that moment to draw the driver, but make sure he doesn't get mad, or whatever, or your own hand. You can always draw something that you have in front of you. I still think somebody asked before about literature, and I'm thinking if there's anything very specific about space. And I know that Mike Rode, or the sketch note handbook, he talks a little bit about different patterns, like how could you structure your flow of drawing, so you can have a look at that. And then the rest is, maybe it's more in general, like artistic training, like and design training. So and of course you don't want to have to study that whole training of artists, but of course that's something that people who study visual arts are training a lot, and lots of by practice as well. So maybe in this kind of their literature you can find more about that, or you can just look up that the topic of visual weight and balance and the gestalt perception. That is also something that you can just read upon, and don't have any one specific source, unfortunately. I'm just
but when we used to have this rational unified process, we used to have these diagrams, different types of, and you had this list of symbols. Same way we have for SAFE also visual symbolizations. So you just search on the net when you're creating a documentation, and many times you do that we just take the cartoon symbols for Agile. You just search on the net, it's very easily available. Take a screenshot, even with your phone. I'm telling you, my laptop crashed. So I just took those things from the net, took a screenshot, and did, simply I cut those small and kept, and I use it everywhere.
Yes, definitely. Icons and symbols are very omnipresent right now. So you can always look for them. But maybe Charu, you were more referring to then maybe you're listening and you're working offline, and then you want to have an idea of how to draw motivation or whatever they talked about.
Yeah, many abstract words are there, like yeah, process has become common, but now I'm not able to recall right now. But yeah, there are many abstract words for which, and when Rupesh, when you were referring to, different symbols and cartoons, they become, after some time, they become repetitive, for every, so, and then you want to have something different, that could just you give that right depiction of that image. So yeah, I think so that was my question, because how to increase that, that
There is a silver lining which I'll have to point out. Sometimes, like you see, Kaun Banega Crorepati, Amitabh Bachchan has become a face of it, right? So certain symbols, for example, I have a crooked curly hair black guy who's always created some kind of a nuisance. So I use the same guy, and as soon as he comes, everybody starts seeing the risk.
Yes. What did I want to say? Yeah, I think also it's very interesting to sometimes keep changing your visual vocabulary and to also still think about what it actually means. And I always, in my courses, I always do this activity which is called graphic jam, which comes from game storming. I don't know if you know that source. It's an online source, game storming. And there's this one activity called graphic jam where you actually you put this question to the team, like you let them draw. You say, okay, everybody draw motivation, draw participation or productivity. And it's very interesting what people come up. Of course, then people mostly, they are not used to drawing and they first really bump their head in the wall. I mean, how am I supposed to draw this? But then you force them and they still do it in a playful manner. And it's very interesting conversations come up. And it's actually then when it starts to be, because first I ask them for the topics they want to draw because they think that it's hard to draw. And then sometimes when things come up that have one very specific symbol attached to them, it's actually shown that then I see that this conversation is not that rich anymore. For example, sometimes people say, okay, we could draw love. And then everybody draws a heart, of course. And then it's like, okay, love is a heart. But if you draw motivation, and then people think, and then we start to really talk about what does motivation mean to you, and you can learn from them. And then I can learn also about what motivates them. And you can even learn about the company culture, because sometimes everybody draws money, or people draw only vacation, or only, what do you call it, retirement. And that's kind of frustrating when the only thing that they're motivated for is retirement. But almost everybody in the team was only either the older ones, they draw retirement, and the younger ones, they draw vacation. And this is a really interesting insight that you can have by making people draw that. And then if they already have a symbol ready, then it's like a shortcut, and you don't have that real conversation about what that means. So that's an interesting graphic facilitation tool. If you work visually with a team and you have them draw whatever you want to talk about, this can be very interesting.
In fact, the pandemic has changed some paradigms. For example, earlier on, we used to draw a vacation, but now everybody has been on vacation for so long. Now you draw a cup of coffee or two beer glasses cleaning, cheering them up, or a dance. People get more excited. So things change with time.
Yeah.
That's totally true. Yes.
So it's already 10:20, and we were discussing, and many participants have already left. Before we are forced to leave, I would like to thank you, Cornelia, once again. Thank you so much for the wonderful session, and thank you to everybody for being such a wonderful participant and getting so much engaged into the session.
Thank you, everybody, as well. Yes, it's true. It's really late where you are. So
thank you.
My biggest takeaway today is that, the different laws that you show, laws of proximity and those things. So I was never familiar with that. Yeah. Although I'd been where the Bicablo training, but I never had that view over there. Thank you so much for that. That's my biggest takeaway today.
So happy that you say that. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I will send I can send you, Charu, the slides,
Yeah.
and so you can look it up. And I mean, all of this information is also somewhere out there, but it's good to have it somewhere
Yeah, certainly.
together.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I'll be sharing this PPT with all the participants.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.
I
Bye,
look forward to it.
everyone.
I plan to make one sheet on OKRs tomorrow. So if you share it tonight, fantastic. Nothing like it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll try to do it.
I'm pushing you too much, just in case if it's possible. Otherwise, don't.
I'll try my level best because we have to, upload recordings and everything as well. So maybe I can, I'll
I
share
get
that
that.
to you individually.
Yeah.
And then rest of the information.
We can share what all we have more, which comes in creativity with this, and share a few documents and create them in ourselves, and which you can all use in your safe, and even Rally has a good tool, and Jira has some images.
Yeah.
Let me do that when I have time. I mean, just extract these things out and give it to you guys.
Yeah, that will be great.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.